The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the loudest sound at the table, even though the conversation was steady and polite. My husband sat at the head discussing something about interest rates and property taxes with his brother, who seemed only half invested in the conversation, his eyes drifting toward me more than once, not overtly, never directly, but enough for my body to catch it before my mind did. I had chosen that dress carefully, dark green, long sleeves, but fitted just enough to feel like I was wearing something for myself, not for the routine of dinner, underneath lace that no one would see. A private decision made while brushing my hair and pretending it didn't matter that I had layered perfume on my collarbone, a scent I hadn't worn in years. There was no real tension between them. My husband and his brother got along fine. They were different enough to avoid rivalry, but similar enough to fall into their shared silences. My husband was composed, measured, always filtering emotion through logic. His brother, on the other hand, spoke with his hands, made jokes that cut a little too close to the bone, and didn't apologize for silence. After dinner, my husband excused himself to take a late call upstairs. I gathered plates, the routine so embedded in my body I didn't even need to think. His brother followed me into the kitchen, leaning on the doorway as I scraped leftovers into a container. "You always make things look easy," he said. Not as a compliment, not even fully allowed, more like an observation. I didn't turn around immediately. My hands moved slower. "What things?" "Everything," he said, a soft shrug behind his voice. "Dinner, smile, holding it together." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I wiped my hands on a towel and turned to face him. He didn't look away. That was the difference. My husband always looked down, or at his watch, or at a screen. His brother looked at me, at my face, my body, my posture. It felt like standing in front of a mirror that could see under your skin. He stepped into the room fully, just a few feet closer. The distance between us remained intact, but it felt thinner somehow. I reached for a wine glass only to realize it was already clean and dry. "Need help with anything?" he asked. "No," I said, too quickly, then softer. "Thanks. I've got it." He nodded but didn't move. For a second I imagined taking one step closer. Just one. What would happen? Would he lean in? Would I let him? The thought burned through me like a slow match. Not because I wanted it, not yet, but because it was possible. That was enough to make my hands tremble slightly when I reached for the dishcloth. "I should get going," he said finally, pushing himself off the counter. I nodded, staring too long at the floor. "Thanks for coming." He left without saying anything else. The door clicked behind him, quiet but final. When I went to bed that night, my husband was already asleep. I watched him for a while, his familiar profile, his arm curled neatly over the pillow. I slipped into bed, without brushing my hair, without changing out of that green dress. And I thought about the way his brother had said, everything. Next time, I wondered, would he say it again? Would I answer differently? Because something small had shifted tonight, something invisible but heavy, and I could already feel it waiting for part two. I saw him again 4 days later. It wasn't planned. I'd gone to the hardware store alone. My husband was in a virtual meeting that, as always, had bled into the evening. He'd waved me off with a distracted nod when I asked if he wanted to join. I was there to look at light fixtures for the upstairs hallway, the kind of home detail that only I seemed to care about. I was standing in front of a row of matte black sconces, comparing the subtle difference in finishes, when I heard a voice behind me. "You really think one of these will make a difference?" I turned, and there he was, his brother, again leaning, again observing. He wasn't in a suit like my husband, but in a faded gray t-shirt and jeans, hands in his pockets. Relaxed, present, a contrast to every man I'd spoken to all week. I told myself to keep it neutral, light. Some of us still believe in ambience. His smile curled just at one corner. "You always had good taste." We walked the aisles together, not looking at each other too much. He didn't ask why I was there alone. I didn't offer. We lingered longer than we should have in front of kitchen faucets, talking quietly about nothing, brands, materials, The absurd price of drawer handles. It was domestic, oddly intimate. More intimate, I realized, than any recent evening in our house. By the time we stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, something had thickened in the air. I could feel it like a fabric caught between us. We walked toward our cars, his parked a few spots over from mine, almost deliberately aligned, and stopped just short of saying goodbye. He looked at me then, really looked, not the way men usually look, but like he was reading something he'd already read before and still didn't fully understand. His hand brushed against my elbow, not by accident, but not in a way that demanded a reaction. It was a test, and I didn't pull away. I should have, I know that. But in that second, it felt like pulling away would have been the lie. I had been so many things lately: organized, efficient, polite, but not honest, not with myself. He stepped in closer, just enough. I held my breath. There were cars nearby, people walking past, the wide world still functioning. But between us, the moment contracted, quiet and steady. He leaned down, not fast, not hungry, and kissed me. It wasn't cinematic. There was no music, just lips and skin and breath, and the terrifying calm of recognizing something you didn't know you were starving for. His hand hovered at the edge of my hip, not grasping, just there. A heat spread under my ribs that felt old and new all at once. I let it happen, for 3, maybe 4 seconds, and then I stepped back. I should go, I said, voice low and unsteady. He didn't argue, just gave a slight nod and watched me walk to my car. I opened the door, sat down, and only then realized my hands were trembling. I didn't drive away immediately. I sat with the keys in the ignition, staring through the windshield at nothing. My lips still tingled, not from pressure or passion, but because something had opened. Not a wound, but a door. And doors, once opened, don't always stay closed. That night, I didn't tell my husband about the light fixtures. I didn't tell him about anything. He was on the phone during dinner, making plans for another conference in another city. I cleared the plates, refolded the napkins, wiped the counter twice. And when I finally went upstairs, I undressed slowly, choosing a set of lingerie I hadn't worn in months. Not for anyone to see, just for the feeling of silk against skin. Just to remind myself I was still there, underneath the routine. In the mirror, I didn't look guilty. I looked awake, and I knew I'd see him again. It started innocently, as these things often do. At least that's what I told myself. A few nights after the kiss, my husband and I sat side by side on the couch, watching the playback from a recent family gathering. It had been my idea, an attempt to do something together, a word that had become more nostalgic than real in our marriage. He held the remote loosely in one hand, skipping past uninteresting bits with clinical precision, stopping occasionally to point out a funny remark or awkward moment from someone in the background. I nodded, laughed when expected, but I wasn't really watching the screen. I was waiting. I didn't know what for until I saw it. A moment. It was no more than 5 seconds, maybe less. The camera, held by someone else, had panned across the yard during the barbecue. People in conversation, drinks in hand, kids running across the lawn. Then the lens caught us, me and him, his brother. We were near the grill, a little apart from the others. I was saying something, laughing, turning slightly toward him. His hand brushed my lower back as he leaned in closer, and I didn't step away. The movement was subtle, but on screen, in the stillness of that recording, it looked intimate. It looked like something. My stomach clenched as the clip passed. My husband didn't react. He didn't rewind, didn't comment. Maybe he didn't notice, or maybe he did, and decided to file it away under not worth a confrontation. That was his way, avoidance dressed up as patience. He moved on to the next scene. I stared at the paused frame in my mind, seeing the shape of my body leaning ever so slightly toward another man. It didn't scream betrayal, but it whispered it, like a secret too familiar to be imagined. Later, when he'd gone upstairs to answer yet another work email, I stayed behind, scrolling through photos from that day. I found one, cropped, candid, where we were both in the background. I was standing close to the grill, one hand tucked under my chin in mid-laugh, and he was beside me, his body turned toward mine. We weren't touching, but the space between us said everything. It was the absence of distance, more than presence that told the truth. I locked my phone and set it aside. My heart had picked up a quiet, steady rhythm, like a low drum beat in an empty hall. That night, I dreamt in color, and every color was a shade of tension, every image a half-formed shape of want. The following day, I didn't hear from him. No messages, no unexpected visits. I found myself glancing out the window more than usual, as if expecting his car to pull into the driveway without warning. When it didn't, I convinced myself that maybe it was over. Maybe the kiss had been a single, reckless act, charged by timing, by proximity, by the dull ache of emotional neglect. Maybe we'd both felt the line and decided not to cross it again. But then my phone lit up, just a message, no greeting, no emojis, just a line that I read 3 times before answering. Do you remember the color of your dress that day? I did. Dark green, long sleeves, lace underneath. I didn't respond immediately. I closed my eyes, imagined his voice saying the words, the slight smile playing on his lips, the way he tilted his head when waiting for a response. I typed slowly, "Yes, do you?" 3 dots blinked for a moment, then stopped. He didn't write back, but he didn't need to. We were already talking in silence. I hadn't known he would be moving in. No one told me in advance. It came out casually, almost carelessly. My husband placing his coffee cup on the table, mentioning offhand that his brother needed a place to stay for a few days while electricians worked on his house. Of course he'll stay here, who else? He added, already halfway through opening his laptop, not noticing the way my breath caught for just a second too long. There was no trap in it, no calculation, just practicality, logic, efficiency, my husband's way. But something inside me twisted. The idea of him, his brother, sleeping under our roof, walking the same hallway, hearing the shower run, passing me in the kitchen in the early morning. It unsettled me and excited me. I tried not to look in the mirror that day, not because I feared what I'd see, but because I feared I might not look guilty at all. I feared I might look eager. He arrived with a small suitcase and a box of tools. In case anything around the house needs fixing, he said, almost apologetic. I noticed he looked different, beard trimmed, shirt pressed, eyes calm but alert. He didn't stare at me, not openly, but every movement he made seemed tuned to my attention, as if he was daring me to notice. That first evening was almost unbearable. The 3 of us had dinner, pleasant, ordinary, forgettable on the surface. Talk of neighborhood alarms going off, the weekend weather, a funny comment from one of his coworkers. Nothing unusual, except that every glance across the table felt laced with meaning, especially his. He didn't smile too much, didn't flirt, but he looked, just long enough. After dinner, my husband excused himself to finish a report upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen drying clean dishes that didn't need drying. His brother lingered at the doorway, leaning his shoulder against the frame. We were silent, not the silence of discomfort, but the kind that pulses with something unspoken, something already present. He asked if there was anything around the house I'd been meaning to fix. His voice was casual, like he was asking about the weather. I nodded and mentioned the bathroom cabinet. Its hinge had been loose for months. He followed me up the stairs. I walked ahead, hyper aware of every step behind me. I could hear the rhythm of his breathing, steady, just a touch too deep. When I opened the bathroom door, he stepped inside with me. It was a narrow space, compact, with a large mirror that caught both our reflections. The light was warm, muted, casting everything in softness. He crouched down to examine the cabinet. I stood behind him, arms folded, pretending to study the tiles, while my heart knocked violently against my ribs. When he stood up again, our eyes met in the mirror. Neither of us spoke. I was still in my house dress, fitted, sleeveless. My hair was damp from a recent shower, clinging slightly to my collarbone. I hadn't bothered to brush it out, not because I forgot, because I didn't want to. He put the screwdriver back in the box, but didn't move to leave. We kept looking at each other through the mirror, the space between us no longer physical, but suspended, breathless. He stepped forward, just one slow step, testing the line, waiting to see if I would draw it. I didn't, but I didn't cross it either. The air between us crackled, thin as thread. He stood close enough for me to feel the heat of him at my back, but not close enough to touch. "I can feel you shaking," he said quietly, his voice low and level. "Even when you don't move." I didn't answer, and then he left. I stood there watching my own reflection. My skin still remembered the space he had filled, my eyes the way he had looked at me, and my breath, held in then released, was the only sound I could hear. Something irreversible had begun, not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible all the same. The invitation came from my husband, a suggestion over breakfast, casual and thoughtless in the way only someone completely unaware could manage. He had read somewhere that a weekend by the lake could reconnect the nervous system. We had a family friend's cabin, rarely used this time of year, just far enough to feel like a break, close enough to justify not making a production out of it. "You, me, and my brother," he said between sips of coffee. "Get some fresh air." I don't remember what I answered, something neutral, non-committal, but the moment he said it, I felt a drop of something cold slide down my spine. Not fear, anticipation, dread and thrill sharing the same pulse. We drove out on Friday afternoon, the car packed with sweaters, wine, and too many things we wouldn't use. I sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, pretending to read messages I wasn't receiving. His brother sat in the back. I could feel his gaze in the rearview mirror, like a steady hum behind my neck. I didn't look at him. The cabin was plain and square, surrounded by pine trees, with a small deck that looked out over the water. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and something faintly sweet, maybe lavender. I took the bedroom facing the lake. They didn't question it. That first evening blurred, grilled food, a few drinks, scattered conversations by the fire pit. I watched them talk, two men with matching shoulders and opposite energies. My husband explained something about his work, gesturing with the bottle in hand, while his brother leaned back, arms folded, eyes flicking toward me when he thought I wasn't watching. Later, while my husband went inside to grab jackets, the two of us were left outside under a sky bruised with stars. "You're quiet," he said, not softly, but privately. "I'm fine." He didn't challenge the lie, just let it hang there between us like laundry forgotten on a line. We didn't speak again that night. The next day was colder than expected. We bundled into sweaters, took a walk along the edge of the lake. My husband walked ahead, pausing to take photos of trees and water and light patterns that only seemed interesting through the lens of someone bored. His brother and I lagged behind, slow on purpose, saying little. When we reached a clearing by the water, he stopped. "I can't keep doing this halfway," he said. The words hit like a hand to the chest. I turned to him, my breath caught somewhere between anger and desire. "You think this is halfway?" I asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Yes, and it's not enough." I didn't know what to say. Everything inside me buzzed. Panic, want, the impossible math of decision. Before I could think too much, he stepped forward. One step, two. His hand found mine, not grabbing, just holding. My fingers curled instinctively around his. He looked at me, not asking permission, just waiting for truth. And I didn't lie. We kissed. Not the first time, but it felt like it was. Not rushed, not stolen, not accidental. It was chosen. There were pine needles under my feet, wind in my hair, and the taste of him on my lips. A moment that held no performance, no apology. When we pulled apart, I didn't step away. We walked back separately. I arrived first, pretending to be cold, wrapping myself in a blanket by the fireplace. My husband handed me a cup of tea without looking at my face. He talked about dinner plans. I nodded, drank, smiled at the right moments. Later that night, I lay in bed with my back to the window. My husband snored softly beside me, unaware. And outside, through the curtain, I saw the glow of a cigarette flare and fade. He was still awake. So was I. Neither of us wanted to sleep. The return home should have settled everything. A weekend like that, where the lines had not only been crossed, but deliberately stepped over, should have made us careful, maybe even afraid. I should have felt guilt in the passenger seat of the car, watching trees smear past the window, my husband humming softly along with some outdated playlist. I should have looked at the rearview mirror and seen a stranger in the back seat. But I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if something dormant in me had opened and simply refused to go back to sleep. I wasn't confused about what had happened anymore. I wasn't second guessing. The only uncertainty left was when and how it would happen again. Back at home, normal life resumed with theatrical ease. My husband returned to his desk, his calls, his spreadsheets. He hadn't noticed a thing, or maybe he had, but chose, consciously, to exist inside his own version of the story, one where nothing cracked, one where his wife smiled and cooked and asked him about his day. And I did smile, I did ask, but I also rearranged our closet, placing my softest sweaters toward the front. I bought new perfume, something warmer, with notes of amber and something faintly bitter. I shaved my legs on a Monday morning, not because I had anywhere to be, but because I couldn't stand not feeling the softness against my own sheets. He didn't reach for me that week, not in bed, not in passing. I began to realize that the physical absence I had once excused as stress or distraction was simply a rhythm he had settled into. Intimacy had become a calendar item, one that kept getting postponed. And yet my skin still remembered the way his brother's hand had rested against my waist, as if I were something worth holding, not just passing by. We didn't message much, just one word now and then. There. Awake? Thursday. It was enough. I found ways to be gone when I needed to be. A run to the pharmacy, a meeting that didn't exist, a drive through neighborhoods we didn't live in. He didn't question it. He had meetings of his own, always with muted microphones and unreadable expressions. That Thursday, I said I had a dentist appointment. He met me near the community park, the one where the walking path dipped behind a wall of trees out of view from the street. We didn't speak when we saw each other, just walked, side by side, until we reached a bench that had been half swallowed by ivy. I sat. He stood. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I looked up. I almost didn't, but you did. His voice wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, like he knew what it cost me. I pulled my coat tighter around me, suddenly hyper-aware of the wind brushing against my exposed wrists. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear with the back of his fingers. That simple movement felt more intimate than any kiss. It didn't lead to anything that day. We didn't touch beyond that, but it was the first time I realized we didn't need the excuse of desire. It wasn't about thrill anymore. It was about recognition. Someone seeing what you tried to hide and not looking away. That night, my husband mentioned he might have to travel again soon. He didn't look at me when he said it. I didn't ask where. He kissed me on the forehead before bed. It was gentle, familiar, and hollow. I lay awake long after he fell asleep, my body curled inward, listening to the ticking of the hallway clock, the faint drip from the bathroom faucet, the wind tapping at the window like it knew something no one else did. And I knew this wasn't ending. Not yet. The mistake wasn't in the act. It was in the rhythm. We had fallen into something resembling routine, quiet meetings, calculated silences, brief messages written without punctuation. It wasn't love, and it wasn't a fling. It lived in that dangerous space between need and memory, a thing we didn't define but also didn't try to stop. And then I slipped. It happened on a Tuesday, late morning. I had been responding to emails, grocery lists, half-finished errands. My husband was upstairs on a call. I was in the kitchen, phone in hand, when a message came through from him. Just 2 words. Can I? I didn't think. I typed back, yes, back door's open. Except I sent it to the wrong thread. I realized it the second I hit send. My stomach hollowed out. I opened the chat again, my husband's name at the top, bright and unmistakable. I stood frozen, phone in hand, every nerve in my body buzzing with panic. For a second, I considered grabbing the phone, erasing the message, pretending it didn't happen, but it was too late. The red receipt popped up a moment later. He didn't come downstairs. I sat on the edge of the dining room chair, waiting, listening. The creak of the floor above me, the faint sound of his voice finishing a sentence into the headset, the silence that followed. Still, he didn't come down. That night, he didn't mention the message. Not during dinner, not afterward. He didn't act angry. He didn't act suspicious. If anything, He was unusually attentive, asking if I liked the meal, whether I wanted to watch something later, even touching my shoulder lightly as he passed by to the sink. And it was that calm that terrified me. It meant he was thinking. It meant something had shifted in him, even if he wouldn't name it. Later that evening, as I was folding laundry in the bedroom, he stepped inside without a word. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I kept folding. He watched me for a moment and said, "You're quieter lately." I didn't look up. "Just tired." "Of me?" It wasn't said with cruelty. It wasn't even accusatory, just simple, like he already knew the answer. I didn't respond. Silence was safer. He left the room a moment later, and I stood there holding one of his shirts, the scent of his cologne barely clinging to the fabric. It used to be comforting. Now it felt like memory, something that used to mean something, now just lingering out of habit. That night he kissed me, not out of desire, out of something else. Ownership, maybe, or fear, or a need to prove he still could. His lips were warm, familiar, but my body didn't respond. I let it happen, out of kindness or guilt or resignation. I didn't know which. Afterward, I stared at the ceiling in the dark, his arm draped over me, heavy and distant at once, and I felt nothing, nothing but the weight of his silence and the weight of my own. Outside, I knew the other one was still awake. I hadn't answered his last message. "Are you okay?" I didn't reply, but he would know. He always knew when something inside me had changed. And tonight something had. Not because I was caught, but because I wasn't sure who I was hiding from anymore. He showed up the next morning without warning. No message, no call. Just a knock, sharp, deliberate, on the side door we rarely used. I heard it from the hallway and froze, towel wrapped around my wet hair, robe clinging to my back. My husband had left early for a meeting. The house was still filled with steam and the scent of citrus shampoo. I opened the door slowly. There he was. His eyes scanned my face without greeting, as if the silence was part of some unspoken agreement. "You didn't answer," he said. "I couldn't," I replied. He nodded, stepped inside. We both knew what this was, even if we didn't give it a name. I gestured toward the living room, but we didn't go there. Instead, we ended up in the hallway between the kitchen and the stairs, the place where everything always felt half-finished. A box of light bulbs sat on the floor, a scuff on the wall I hadn't painted over, the ordinary mess of a life in progress. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I leaned opposite him, my arms folded too. We stood like that for a moment, two reflections of a problem we hadn't dared solve. "I think he knows," I said quietly. His jaw flexed, but he didn't seem surprised. "Does it change anything?" "I don't know," I admitted. The air between us felt thick again, like that first night in the kitchen when a glance had carried more weight than a touch. Now the weight was real, heavy in the space we inhabited. We weren't pretending anymore. "I can't do this halfway either," I said, my voice almost too soft. He pushed off the wall, stepped closer. I didn't move. I wanted to move, not away, but toward. Every part of my body ached with a need I hadn't let myself name, not lust, not affection, something older, something that had been ignored for so long it had started growing teeth. He reached out, placed a hand on my waist, grounding rather than grabbing. His thumb moved lightly over the fabric of the robe, not pulling, just tracing. "I didn't come here to push you," he said. "I came because I needed to see you." And somehow that was worse, because it wasn't impulsive. It wasn't adrenaline. It was thought out. It was honest. We stood like that for too long, or maybe not long enough. A noise from outside broke the stillness, a car passing, a dog barking 2 houses over. But the world inside that hallway didn't shift. Not yet. Finally, I pulled away, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I stepped back, just enough to breathe again. "You should go," I said, my voice cracked but firm. He nodded, not angry, not hurt, just accepting. "I'll wait," he said before turning, "even if I don't know what I'm waiting for." When the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up. The tile was cold beneath me. My robe had slipped slightly open, but I didn't fix it. I didn't care. There were too many versions of myself colliding all at once. Woman, wife, desire, guilt, memory. I didn't know which one to hold on to anymore. Later that day, I found a note in my bag. I hadn't seen him place it there. It was folded neatly, almost too neatly, as if he didn't trust himself to say the words aloud. You're the first thing that's made me feel like I'm not sleepwalking. I reread it 3 times. Then I tucked it into the back of my lingerie drawer, between silks I hadn't worn in years and lace I'd only started wearing again, for reasons I wouldn't say out loud. And that night, when my husband reached out for me in bed, gently, slowly, like a man trying to fix something without knowing what's broken, I let him. I let him touch me, and I tried, for just one moment, to pretend that I could still disappear into a version of myself that hadn't already chosen someone else. He invited me on a trip. My husband, I mean. It wasn't extravagant, nothing tropical or postcard worthy, just a weekend out of town, coastal maybe, something about ocean air and quiet walks. He mentioned it over dinner, as if proposing we pick up wine on the way home, not pack an overnight bag and leave the city. We could use the time, he said. Just the two of us. I nodded, almost automatically, as I chewed a bite of salad that suddenly tasted like nothing. The idea should have comforted me. A gesture, a return to something familiar. But instead, it felt like being handed a photograph of someone I used to know. The days leading up to the trip passed slowly. I packed a small bag, practical clothing, minimal makeup, just one set of lingerie I knew I wouldn't wear. My movements were careful, deliberate, like I was preparing for a performance I no longer had the heart to rehearse. He seemed lighter, or maybe just hopeful. In the car, he played the same playlist we used to listen to years ago, back when silence between us felt warm, not weighted. He pointed out landmarks I already knew, told stories I had heard before, and I laughed in the right places. Later, we walked along the shoreline. He reached for my hand. I let him. His fingers were warm, familiar. They didn't thrill me, but they didn't repulse me either. That was the problem. I had become fluent in pretending. Back in the room, we shared a quiet dinner. Candles flickered, casting soft light over his face as he spoke about work, about changes he was considering, about how he'd been thinking more lately. He didn't say what he was thinking about. I didn't ask. That night, he touched me again, not urgently, but tenderly, as if he still believed tenderness could undo what distance had hardened. I responded the way I had taught myself to respond, gently, enough to satisfy the moment, not enough to surrender to it. When he fell asleep, I lay on my side, facing the window, watching the curtains stir in the ocean breeze. And I realized that this attempt, this effort, it wasn't dishonest. It just wasn't enough. Not anymore. The next morning, I dressed quietly while he slept. Simple jeans, a soft cotton shirt, hair tied back. I packed slowly, deliberately. My phone buzzed once. No name, just a number I had memorized in silence. Are you okay? I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. When we returned home, the house felt unchanged. The hallway still smelled faintly of coffee and dust. The bathroom light still flickered. I walked through the room slowly, like someone returning to a place they had once called home, now a stranger in their own kitchen. I opened a drawer in the bedroom and pulled out the note he'd left me, the one I had hidden between lace and silk. I unfolded it, read the words again. You're the first thing that's made me feel like I'm not sleepwalking. I stood there for a long moment. Then I stepped to the window and looked out. There he was. Across the street, outside the house next door, bent over a cardboard box he was pretending to unpack. His shirt clung to his back. His sleeves were rolled up. He didn't look up, but he didn't need to, because I was already moving, and I wasn't sleepwalking anymore either.